You've heard the number, right? 330 million gods. That's what the world usually says about India, that Hindus worship a population of deities larger than the population of the United States. It's the kind of statistic that makes people roll their eyes and dismiss the whole thing as chaotic fantasy. But what if I told you that number is a massive centuries-old translation error? A mistake that turned a sophisticated philosophical concept into a cartoon. The Sanskrit word used in the ancient texts is Koti. And yes, in modern Hindi and even later Sanskrit, Koti means 10 million, a crore. But words change over time. In the ancient Vedic context, Koti had a completely different primary meaning. It meant type, category, or supreme. The texts weren't talking about a population explosion of gods. They were talking about 33 types of divine energy, the 12 Adityas, or solar deities, the 11 Rudras, or elements of destruction, renewal, the 8 Vasus, elements of nature, and the 2 Ashvins, or healers. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. If we got the number wrong, what else did we miss? What if the flying chariots in the epics aren't just fantasy but a memory of lost technology? What if the terrifying ghost with backward feet isn't a monster but a warning about how society treats women? And what if the most famous demon in Indian history, the 10-headed Ravana, wasn't a monster at all, but the most intelligent man who ever lived, who just made one fatal mistake? Myths aren't lies. They are encrypted data. They are history, astronomy, and psychology, hidden inside a fairy tale so they wouldn't be forgotten. When a civilization survives for 5,000 years, it learns that hard drives fail, paper rots, and stone crumbles. But stories survive. Today, we are unzipping the files. We are cracking the code. Stick around. Let's start with something that scares everyone: darkness. In Hindu mythology, a solar eclipse happens when a demon named Rahu, a disembodied head, swallows the sun. His body, the severed tail, is called Ketu. Sounds like a primitive campfire story, right? Just superstitious people afraid of the dark? Wrong. This story is actually an advanced astronomical code that kept the science alive for thousands of years. Ancient Indian astronomers figured out that the sun and moon don't just bump into each other randomly. They knew their orbits intersect at 2 specific mathematical points. If the full moon hits one of these points, boom, eclipse. They named the north node Rahu and the south node Ketu. They didn't literally think a monster was eating the sun. They personified the mathematical coordinates, the lunar nodes, to teach the common people exactly when to expect the darkness. By turning math into a monster, they ensured that even an uneducated farmer knew that when Rahu approaches, the light goes out. It was a mnemonic device. And here's the kicker. In Vedic astrology, Rahu and Ketu aren't even gods. They are shadow planets, or Chayagraha. They represent the confusion and the eclipse of consciousness. The myth was never about the sky. It was about the math of the sky. Now, let's look at one of the weirdest stories in the repertoire. The churning of the ocean, or Samudra Manthan. The gods and demons work together to churn the cosmic ocean using a giant mountain as a rod and a giant snake as a rope to get the nectar of immortality. It sounds like a drug trip, but look closer. It's a perfect allegory for consciousness and spiritual psychology. The ocean of milk represents the unmanifest consciousness, the mind before a thought has formed. The mountain, Mandara, represents focus or willpower. You need a stable rod to churn the mind. The snake, Basuki, represents desire or the ego. You have to pull on desire back and forth to churn out wisdom. And what comes out first? Not the nectar. Poison. The hala. This is the psychological truth. When you start meditating, when you start churning your own mind, the first thing that comes up isn't bliss. It's your trauma. It's your pain. It's the poison of your past. The myth tells you that you have to deal with the poison, like Lord Shiva drinking it, before you can get to the nectar, Amrita. It's a roadmap for therapy, written 2,000 years before Freud. Now, look down, into the ocean. The Ramayana tells the epic story of Lord Rama building a bridge of floating stones to cross the sea to Lanka to rescue his wife Sita. The Rama Setu. For centuries, historians dismissed this as total fantasy. Monkeys building a bridge? Floating stones? Impossible. But then NASA satellites took a picture. There is a chain of limestone shoals exactly where the myth says it was. It's called Adam's Bridge. Geologists found that these shoals were once a continuous land connection. And get this, during the last ice age, roughly 7,000 to 18,000 years ago, when sea levels were lower, this bridge was exposed. It was walkable. So did an army of monkeys build it? That's the poetry. But does the myth preserve a geological memory of a time when human beings could physically walk from India to Sri Lanka? Absolutely. The myth is a map. And it's not the only one. The Mahabharata talks about a golden city called Dwarka, the kingdom of Lord Krishna. It says the city was so wealthy the walls were inlaid with jewels. But when Krishna left the earth, the ocean rose up and swallowed the city whole. Again, historians said, nice story, Atlantis of the East, not real. Until the 1980s, when marine archaeologists led by Dr. S.R. Rao started diving off the coast of modern-day Gujarat. They found scattered stone structures, well-dressed blocks, and massive stone anchors lying 3 to 6 meters underwater. They found the remains of a fortified port city that had been submerged by rising sea levels or a massive tsunami. The myth wasn't a lie. It was a report. It was an eyewitness account of a climate change catastrophe that wiped out a civilization thousands of years ago. The story survived when the city didn't. But not all myths are about the ocean. Some are frozen in the ice. High in the Himalayas, at 16,000 feet, lies Roopkund Lake, the Skeleton Lake. For decades, trekkers have found hundreds of human skeletons scattered around this lake. Who were they? An army, a lost trade caravan. The local legend says they were a king, Jasdal, and his entourage on a pilgrimage to the goddess Nanda Devi. The legend says they were partying, dancing, and disrespecting the sacred silence of the mountain. So the goddess, in her fury, rained down iron balls from the sky and crushed them all. In 2004, forensic scientists examined the skulls. They found that the fractures weren't from swords or arrows, they were from blunt force trauma from above. The iron balls were hailstones, massive, cricket ball-sized hailstones. The legend of the goddess's wrath was a perfect forensic record of a freak weather event from the 9th century. Then there's the miracle medicine. In the Ramayana, when Lakshmana is wounded, the monkey god Hanuman flies to the Himalayas to fetch the Sanjeevani booty, the herb that breathes life back into the dead. Magic, right? Well, scientists have been hunting for this plant for decades, and they found a candidate, Selaginella bryopteris. It's a fern found in the Indian hills, and it has a biological superpower. It can dry out completely, looking dead, brown, and crispy for months. It looks like firewood. But the moment you add water, it resurrects. It turns vibrant green and biologically active again in seconds. To an ancient observer, a plant that could come back from the dead was the ultimate symbol of healing. The myth didn't invent the magic, it observed the biology. Now, let's talk about the monsters inside your head. The villain of the Ramayana is Ravana. He's depicted as a terrifying demon with 10 heads and 20 arms. But here's the twist. Ravana wasn't just a brute. He was a scholar. He was a master of the Vedas. He was a devotee of Shiva. He was arguably the most intelligent being on the planet. So why the 10 heads? The 10 heads aren't literal. They are a psychological profile. They represent the 10 emotions that can hijack your intellect. Kama, lust, krodha, anger, moha, delusion, lobha, pride, mada, pete, materia, envy, manas, mind, buddhi, intellect, chitta, will, and ahankara, ego. Ravana is a story of what happens when your ego, one of the heads, overpowers your wisdom. He is the genius who destroys himself because he cannot control his senses. The myth isn't telling you to fight a guy with 10 heads. It's telling you to fight the 10 voices in your own head. It is a cautionary tale about how intellect without emotional control is just a more efficient way to destroy yourself. Every Dasar, when Indians burn the effigy of Ravana, they aren't just burning a demon, they are ritually burning the negative traits within themselves. And speaking of voices, let's talk about the ghost that terrifies every truck driver in North India, the Chadala or the Bichal Peri, the woman with backward feet. The legend is always the same. A beautiful woman on a lonely road, she asks for a lift, but when you look down, her feet are turned the wrong way round. Why backward feet? This is where folklore gets tragic. The Chudale is traditionally the ghost of a woman who died during childbirth, or a woman who died with unsatisfied desires because of how society treated her. The backward feet symbolize that she doesn't belong to the world of the living anymore. She is an inversion of humanity. But deeper than that, she is the manifestation of collective guilt. The monster isn't the woman. The monster is the neglect that created her. In a society that historically marginalized women or reduced them to their reproductive role, the Chudale is the fear that the oppressed will come back for revenge. She targets men, specifically the male relatives who wronged her. It is a supernatural enforcement of justice in a world where legal justice was often denied to women. Sometimes the monsters are the scholars themselves. Have you heard of the Brahma Raksasa? In Indian folklore, this isn't just any demon. It is specifically the ghost of a Brahmin, a scholar or priest who has done something terrible. Maybe he misused his knowledge, maybe he was arrogant, or maybe he withheld knowledge from a deserving student. It is a terrifying concept. It suggests that knowledge without ethics doesn't make you a better person. It makes you a more dangerous monster. A Brahman Raksasa retains all his knowledge, but is cursed with an unquenchable hunger. It is a 2,000-year-old warning to the intellectual elite. Your PhD won't save you if you lose your humanity. In fact, your intelligence just makes your fall more tragic. And sometimes the ghosts aren't people, they are whole villages. In Rajasthan, there's a place called Kuldhara, an entire village that was abandoned overnight in the 1800s. The legend says the cruel Prime Minister Salim Sin wanted to marry the village chief's daughter by force. To protect her honor, all 84 villages of the Paliwal Brahmins vanished in a single night, leaving behind a curse. It's a great story of resistance, but historians and geologists see something else. They see dried up riverbeds. They see evidence of earthquake-related destruction. They see a tax system that became unbearable. The curse was likely a cover story, a way to explain a mass migration caused by a dying water supply and a tyrannical tax collector. The myth gave their departure dignity. It turned a refugee crisis into a moral victory. Then there are the yakshas and yakshinis. You see them in every ancient temple. Beautiful, voluptuous women holding trees, or pot-bellied dwarves holding up pillars. We think of them as minor deities today, but historically, they were the original gods of India. Before the Vedas, before the great temples, the people worshipped the spirits of the trees, the soil, and the water. These were the nature spirits. When the big religions like Buddhism, Jainism, and Hinduism expanded, they didn't wipe out these local gods. They hired them. They turned the yakshas into the guardians of the new gods. That's why you see them on the gates. It's a record of a religious merger that happened 2,500 years ago, a peace treaty between the forest and the temple. But myths aren't just about the past. They are happening right now. Look at the idols of Lord Jagannath in Puri. They don't look like the perfect muscular Greek statues or the refined Chola bronzes. They are wooden stumps, giant eyes, no hands, no feet. Why? The legend says the king commissioned a divine carpenter, Vishwakarma, to carve God. But the queen opened the door too early and the carpenter vanished, leaving the work unfinished. It's a story about patience, sure, but the deeper meaning, it tells us that God is formless. The unfinished look is a feature, not a bug. It represents a deity that has no hands, yet accepts every offering. No feet, yet moves everywhere. Large eyes to see everything. It teaches that perfection isn't about the outer shell. It's about the presence inside. It validates the imperfect in a world obsessed with perfection. And finally, the myth that you can touch. In Kerala, there is a ritual called Theyyam. A man from a lower caste paints his face, puts on a massive headdress, and looks into a mirror. And in that moment, the myth takes over. He is no longer a man. He becomes the god. He dances on fire. He blesses the crowds. And for those few hours, the high caste Brahmins, the landlords, the powerful people, they bow down to him. They touch his feet. The myth of Theyyam isn't a story about the past. It is a social revolution that happens every single year. It is a mechanism to flip the social hierarchy upside down and remind everyone that divinity lives in the oppressed, too. So, the next time you hear an Indian myth about a monkey lifting a mountain or a demon swallowing the sun, don't just smile and turn the page. Look for the code. Look for the astronomy in the monster. Look for the geology in the bridge. Look for the psychology in the 10 heads. Because these aren't just stories. They are the origin of a civilization's memory. But what about the name of the civilization? Is it India? Is it Bharat? Is it Hindustan? Where do these names come from? And why is the Constitution of India essentially a name change document? That is a story of rivers, Persians, Greeks, and a legendary emperor. And it's next, in Part 6, the origin of the name. What's the most mind-blowing myth code you learned today? The hailstorm, lake, the eclipse, demon, or the resurrecting plant? Let me know in the comments, and please like and subscribe. Stay curious. See ya!